1968, America was on the edge of a knife. The Vietnam War was raging, racial tensions were boiling over, and the counterculture was challenging every norm of American society. In the middle of this chaos, one event would become a flashpoint for the decade's turbulence: the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. A city transformed into a battlefield between anti-war protesters and police forces, where the streets echoed with chants, sirens, and chaos. Today, we dive deep into the protests that rocked the DNC and changed the course of American politics forever. To understand why the 1968 Democratic National Convention became a powder keg, we first need to understand the political and social climate leading up to it. By 1968, the United States was deeply divided. The Vietnam War had escalated to a full-blown conflict, claiming tens of thousands of American lives and causing countless more in Vietnam. Anti-war sentiment was growing, especially among young people who were increasingly skeptical of their government. At the same time, the civil rights movement was in full swing, but so was the backlash against it. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in April, igniting riots across the country. Just 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy, a candidate who had been a beacon of hope for many, was also assassinated. And if that wasn't enough, in 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson shocked the nation by announcing he would not seek re-election, throwing the Democratic Party into disarray. The convention in Chicago was meant to unify the party, but instead, it became a symbol of its division. On the streets, the Democratic Convention was seen as the perfect opportunity for protest. Organizations like the Youth International Party, known as the Yippies, led by activists like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, and the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, led by figures like Tom Hayden, planned to descend on Chicago. The goal? To challenge the political establishment and, in their words, bring the war home. But the protesters weren't alone in their preparations. Chicago's mayor, Richard J. Daley, was determined to maintain order. Daley, a staunch law and order Democrat, had the backing of the city's police force, the National Guard, and even the U.S. Army. He promised that Chicago would be prepared for any disturbances, setting the stage for what would be remembered as a police riot. Daley's orders were clear: maintain control, no matter what. This wasn't just going to be a protest, it was going to be a clash. As the convention kicked off on August 26, 1968, tensions were already high. Delegates, journalists, and spectators filled the convention hall, but the real action was happening outside in the streets of Chicago. Thousands of demonstrators, from seasoned activists to ordinary citizens, gathered in Grant Park, a central point for the protests. What started as peaceful demonstrations quickly became heated. On August 28, tensions reached a boiling point. With thousands of demonstrators surrounding the Conrad Hilton Hotel, where many delegates were staying, the situation spiraled out of control. The police, under orders to prevent any disruptions to the convention, began to crack down hard. Tear gas, batons, and even the occasional rifle butt were used to disperse the crowds. What was intended to be peaceful civil disobedience turned into violent confrontations, as both sides accused the other of inciting the chaos. The clashes of August 28 are widely referred to as the police riot. Caught on live television, millions of Americans watched in horror as Chicago police officers waded into crowds, clubbing both protesters and bystanders indiscriminately. Reporters and camera crews weren't spared either, with some being beaten while the cameras were rolling. But it wasn't just the police. The protesters, frustrated and enraged, fought back, sometimes with rocks, bottles, and whatever else they could find. The streets of Chicago looked like a war zone. Inside the convention hall, things were hardly any better. Tensions erupted among the delegates as they debated the party's stance on the Vietnam War. During a contentious moment, CBS News reporter Dan Rather was punched by a delegate on live TV while trying to interview him. In another, Senator Abraham Ribicoff criticized the Gestapo tactics of Mayor Daley's police, prompting Daley to shout obscenities at him. These moments captured the divide not just within the Democratic Party, but within America itself. It was chaos, and there was no end in sight. The media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception of the convention protests. Television networks broadcast the clashes live, and newspapers around the country ran front-page stories about the violence in Chicago. For many Americans, watching the violence unfold was shocking. Walter Cronkite, the trusted news anchor, famously declared, "I've never seen anything like this. The scenes were disturbing, but they forced the country to confront the growing unrest and the harsh reality of its divisions." Public opinion was divided. Some believed that the police were too heavy-handed, turning what could have been a peaceful protest into a violent encounter. Others felt the protesters got what they deserved, viewing them as unruly troublemakers who needed to be taught a lesson. What was clear, though, was that the convention had exposed a deep rift in American society. Despite the chaos outside, the convention continued. Vice President Hubert Humphrey secured the Democratic nomination, but the scars of the event were deep. Humphrey's association with the Johnson administration's pro-war policies, combined with the violence seen on television, would plague his campaign against the Republican nominee, Richard Nixon. In the aftermath, 8 key protest organizers, including Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Tom Hayden, and Bobby Seale, were charged with conspiracy and inciting a riot. Known as the Chicago 8, and later the Chicago 7, after Seale's trial was separated, their courtroom drama would become another symbol of the era's tensions. The trial was a spectacle, highlighting both the absurdity and gravity of the moment. Though most of their convictions were overturned on appeal, the trial itself served as a vivid reminder of the protest and its impact on American politics and culture. The 1968 Democratic National Convention protests remain a pivotal moment in American history. They marked the beginning of a new era of political activism and exposed the deep divisions within American society that still echo today. From the police's response to the role of media, many of the issues from that week in Chicago continue to be relevant. The protesters might not have stopped the war or prevented the election of Richard Nixon, but they did something equally powerful: they shook the foundation of the American political establishment and forced the nation to look in the mirror. What kind of country did it want to be? That was the question then, and it's still the question now. The 1968 Democratic National Convention protests were more than just a moment. They were a movement. A cry for justice, peace, and change that still resonates today. As we reflect on those tumultuous days, we must remember the lessons they teach us about activism, democracy, and the enduring struggle for a more just society. Thank you for watching. If you found this deep dive into the 1968 DNC protests insightful, please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments, what do you think the legacy of 1968 is? Until next time, stay curious.